Oh, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. We interrupt this program, part whatever the heck. I haven't figured that out yet, but I corrected it on the heading, on the subject line, title of the last video, that I read Departures Part 4, which was really short, and then I read Arrivals Part 1. I started reading it, and I'm like, I went back and checked, make sure what I did, and I was like, man, I distinctly remember reading this to video. So then I remembered. Anyway, Georgie's not feeling good, so I'm going to go ahead and just do some video and call it a night. Do a couple readings. Might do another video beyond that. All right, here we go. Miguel stood up and gave the assembled girls a low, sweeping bow. Señoritas, that was a most excellent repast. You have saved me from a terrible fate of eating my own cooking tonight. I am deeply in your debt. The girls giggled, and Heather said, but Mr. Miguel, we're not done yet. There's still dessert to come. John's eyebrows quirked, and he said, dessert? Sounds like a capital idea to me. Melinda giggled and went into the kitchen with Brittany. They returned moments later with a tall, dark... try to get that better. Chocolate cake studded with precisely ordered pecan halves. Brittany had capped a metal can that she had unlidded to reveal a straw-colored homemade ice cream. Miguel's eyes widened and then exclaimed, Caramba, what a cake. You made it yourselves? And the ice cream too? John laughed. You should see what these girls get up to being trapped in the house for so long by the weather. I have to admit, I have to limit how much baking they do to keep from running through our stores too fast. If we didn't all work so hard, we'd be positively rotund. Nothing like having your own cow for making ice cream. Too bad we don't have more vanilla. Actually, Uncle John, Heather hesitantly spoke, that's not straight vanilla ice cream. We're getting low on extract, so this time we used a little of your whiskey and made vanilla bourbon flavor. You were in court, so I called Aunt Anne at work, and she said that it would be okay. With a look of mock outrage on his face, the man whirled to confront his wife, and she laughed. Oh, don't you look annoyed at me, John Horn. If you'd bought more extract instead of spending it all on whiskey, we'd have plenty for the ice cream. He grinned and looked pointedly at the girls. All I can say is that it had better be good. Now don't stand there looking smug. Start passing out the goods before the ice cream melts. Heather sliced the cake while Brittany dipped the ice cream and Melinda handed round the bowls, giving the first to Miguel. He took a bite of the deep, dark cake and closed his eyes. Ah, yes, what a cake. He looked at John, then said, my friend, what a fortunate man you are to have such children in your household. But you are woefully short of strong backs to help you in your labors. Perhaps you'd care to trade, say, Heather for my youngest son, Alberto? He could help you with the heavy work, and Heather could make cakes for me. He winked at Heather's father. Lisa spoke up and said, oh, no, you don't, Miguel Alvarez. I've heard about Latin men. Besides, what would Carolita say? Miguel adopted a tragic expression and said, alas, but you are right, Senora. Carolita, she is a strong-willed and hot-tempered woman. It would soon lead to tragedy for the Alvarez men, I'm afraid. Luke smiled broadly and cut his eyes at Lisa briefly while facing away from Heather. Oh, I don't know, Miguel. There may be a solution to your problem after all. Is not Roberto a man now and marriageable? Perhaps something could be arranged? Heather looked thunderstruck. Daddy, she said in a horrified tone. Exactamento, Miguel said. Perhaps such an arrangement can be made. Traditionally, the girl's father would provide a dowry. What do you suggest? A crafty look came over the doctor's face. Well, actually, in this case, with Heather being such an excellent cook and having somewhat less than plain features. Daddy, less than plain features, my foot, his daughter snorted. Why? Hush, daughter, her father commanded. I am bargaining with the father of a potential suitor. The faces of all of the women around the table began to cloud, but Luke pressed on intrepidly. Actually, in view of the circumstances, I suggest that it is you who should offer a groom's price for the bride. Miguel looked disconsolate and said, very well. What must be, must be. Will you accept an offer in cattle, or do you require camels or sheep? Such livestock will take time to collect. Cattle? Heather said in outrage. Camels, sheep, Daddy, you're not going to trade me off for livestock. Never did like camels, Luke responded. Had one spit on me in Egypt once. Cattle will do. 12 young heifers in exchange for my prying young heifer would suffice, I believe. The rest of his words were lost as dish towels and napkins thrown by the females wrapped around his head and the men burst out laughing. Really, Mom, Heather said exasperatedly. Did you hear that? Trade me off for cattle and sheep? Her mother gazed levelly at her husband, a glint in her eye. It's just an unfortunate trait when it comes to boys, I mean men, that breaks out from time to time. If we hadn't stopped it when we did, they'd be growing hair all over and grunting before long. It's just a cross that we women must bear in order to perpetuate the species. John took another spoonful of cake and ice cream and said, Heather, you are quite forgiven for taking liberties with my whiskey. This is excellent. Miguel looked thoughtful as he ate more of his cake and then finally said, I have a real proposition I would like to make to Heather and Melinda and Brittany as well. Heather looked sharply at him, as did Brittany and Melinda, but Lisa and Anne looked interested. What have you got in mind, Miguel? It's a business proposition, actually. This cake is excellent, as was the bread we had with our meal. As you know, it is very difficult to get convenience foods of any description now. Many times I have problems even getting ordinary loaf bread. What I am proposing is to give your girls here a chance to earn some money if they like. I will supply the necessary ingredients, perhaps even some of the equipment if necessary, and the girls make them into such items as cakes, pies, and other comestibles as would be good to sell in my store. I believe I could get quite a markup on something as good as the cake, which would allow us both to profit in the venture. I would, of course, pay them for their work and something to Anne and John for the use of their kitchen. The girls would be able to cook to their heart's content, make a little money on the side, and I would get very desirable convenience foods to sell. What do you think? Heather looked excited, as well as Brittany and Melinda. Lisa and Anne looked thoughtful. Well, Anne said, I like the sound of it, but what about the health department? Aren't there regulations about home kitchens being used to make commercial foods? I'm quite sure we could not pass an inspection. I'm not sure any home kitchen could. Miguel nodded his head. He considered for a moment, then said, I do not think it will be a problem, at least not for a while yet. Conditions being unsettled as they are, many are doing things that would ordinarily be frowned upon by our health police. I will run interference for the girls should any bureaucrats become ruffled. During hard times in the past, many people have prepared and sold food from their home kitchens, and I am sure it is happening across the nation even now. I believe our health police will simply have to bow to the inevitable until conditions become more normal. John had been considering the idea since Miguel mentioned it and joined in the discussion. I think you may have something there, Miguel. This could be a real family effort. I supply the physical plant, so to speak, and the girls supply the skilled labor while you supply the raw materials and do the marketing. For the girls' part, we can deal in cash, but for the house, I'd like to work out a barter deal. Anne here brought home some very detailed schematics and materials list for a small-scale methane production plant that was developed in India some time ago, which have been languishing in their archives for years. I'd like to go over it with you and see what you can come up with in the way of materials for building it. You help us build and expand our plant here, and we'll use it to produce your baked goods. Miguel rubbed his chin and said, My friend, I think we have the basis for an understanding here. Allow me to source the necessary supplies and determine how much product I'll be able to sell, and we can all of us sit down and bargain over the details. I'll be happy to help you build your gas plant. Such an installation could serve as a prototype for others to be built in the community as well. A bit of capitalistic self-interest and a public service at the same time. John looked at the girls and asked, Does this sound like something you want to involve yourself in? It'll be a regular job, a must-be-done on time and done right kind of thing. Are you up to it? They looked at each other for reassurance, and each slowly nodded. Heather turned to look at John and said, Yes, sir, I think we're up to it. We'd like to hear Mr. Miguel's detailed presentation when he's got it worked out. Very well then, John said as he put his hand out to Miguel and they shook. Looks like we have the basis for an understanding. Get back with us when you've got your data and we'll discuss this in earnest. Miguel stood and said, Excellent. Senoritas, that was a most excellent meal. Ladies, I thank you for your company. It's growing late, so I should be off before the snow gets any deeper. John walked him to the front door, where he retrieved his coat, put it on, and went outside. John came back into the kitchen and said, Well, that was a fortunate accident you had there, Lisa. She smiled and said, Well, I suppose it did come out all right, but I've still got to get my car fixed. I'm glad to be home and out of that snow. All right, good night. Maybe, maybe not. Come on.